Hi, today we're gonna finally put together all the models that we designed so far in this channel. That is to say, the Lost Pyramid, the Sunken Temple, and the Spider Shrine. If you're curious about how I made these models, you can just go to the description and find the links to these models. One of the focuses of this video is going to be how to create a terrain that responds to geometry. The base of the diorama, in fact, the terrain itself, is going to be made up with two different textures that are going to change one into the other according to the height of the terrain itself. As usual, we're going to use this model to create a real diorama. And this time the diorama is going to be big and awesome. But now, no more talking, and let's start. Today we're not gonna start our model with a starting cube, but we're gonna rather use the models that we designed in the previous videos. So let's move on. We have to take care of the terrain and we need a noise texture. So let's select the terrain, the base, which is actually 90 times 75 centimeters. Let's go to geometry nodes and let's create a new group. We can call it noise. So the setup is very similar to one node group we created in a previous videos. So we need first to add a subdivide surface. Let's add the edge crease and the number of subdivision to the map scheme. Then set position, and we're going to apply a noise texture to the offset. To our noise texture, we're going to apply a bunch of vector math nodes. The first is going to take care of the fact that the noise goes 0 to 1 and we want to go from minus 0.5 to plus 0.5, so subtract 0.5, then multiply for the normal, and finally we can apply a scale and plug this value here. So now we want the noise to apply only in the Z axis, so search separate XYZ and search combine XYZ, and we're gonna select Z. But there's one issue. That is to say that, let's hide the camera, that we want a 3D object because right now is a flat surface. So we for now hide it and just extrude. So we go to tab edit mode, E for extrude, and extrude our base. Now we can turn back on, and as you can see, the object now is three-dimensional, but the noise applied to both sides. So in order to remove the bottom part, we can add a delete geometry and just select the part of the geometry that we want to remove. So we use a compare here, and we just less than 0, and here we're gonna use a separate XYZ with position as vector. So now is on the X, but if we select the Z, we can just control from here how much of this geometry is deleted, and we can also change the scale, which is maybe too much, and 0.1. Okay, and finally set shade smooth. Okay, that's it. That's pretty much the result I wanted. By the way, I'm gonna use the exact same node setup for the water. So we also need to add the stalagmites, but for that we can duplicate the node that we used basically for all the other objects to scatter items on a surface. Something like that for the moment would do. So let's move on and add some other objects to finalize the scene. Actually, this column alone will not hold the ceiling, which, by the way, is also missing, but for the ceiling it's gonna be very fast. We just duplicate this, move it up, rotate on the y-axis for 180 degrees, and it's pretty much done. So let's hide it for the moment. We also need an extra column to hold the ceiling because this one alone won't do the work. So let's add a cube, and we can add geometry node, noise texture, for the same setup we used for this one, and we just crank up the scale, and it's pretty much done. So now we need to add a bridge between the island and this column and some other objects. So I'm gonna fast forward because this is just ordinary modeling. So let's now switch to colors. Of course, we have to apply texture to the newly created objects, and I'm gonna use the brick texture of the sunken temple. Control L, link materials, and that's it. For the stairs, I have the side panel, and I'm gonna use the same texture also for the ground. Okay, let's hide the stalagmites for the moment. I want to make some changes to the terrain. This texture actually it doesn't really look like a seabed, and moreover I want to add some cracks. However, I'm not gonna really crack or maybe change the geometry, but I'm gonna work with the texture. So let's go to shading, and in order to create some cracks, I'm gonna add mapping node, and from here I'm gonna use a color mix using as colors the vector and a noise texture. This is our base, and here I'm gonna create the crack with a Voronoi texture set to distance to edge. Now I need a mix shader to combine those shaders, and this is gonna be our factor, and as a second shader I'm gonna use a transparent. Let's switch them. Okay, right now they're really blended, so in order to make the cracks visible, I have to use a color ramp and crank the color very close to the white, to one side, and let's just increase the value, and I'm gonna turn to, let's make it 5. So as you can see, we have some nice cracks. If I want to increase the size of the cracks, I can just move it slightly to the right, and the size gonna increase. Perfect. So that's exactly what I was looking for. But I also want some sand on the seabed. So let's first group these nodes. Control J, F2, cracks. That's it, great. And move it up to make some room for the second shader, which is going to be sand. So let's select this, duplicate, and Control Shift T for a nice sand. Then Control J, group it, move it to the side, and move everything. Here we need a second Shift T mix shader to mix this with this, so the sand with the rocks, and they're gonna go here. Now they're nicely blended, but this is not the result I want. I want to have the sand on the bottom and the rocks on the top. And this is gonna be hard with texture, because we don't really have a way to use the geometry, or do we? Yes, we do. Actually, we can actually increase this and select geometry node, and we select the noise. So we select here, we had the noise line, and we just select the Z, so the end point of this node group and plug it in the group output. Then here we have output attribute. Let's call it height and copy the name. Now here we can plug the attribute. So search attribute, we type the name height, and we were going to use it as factor. However, before doing that, we need to make some, let's plug the color here and Control Shift click to see the result. As you can see, there is a slightly darker area and a clearer one. So with a color ramp, I can increase the visibility. Let's make it visible. It's still not enough. Even if I cranked everything up, the value is not enough to be visible. So here from the geometry node panel, we just Shift A, select vector math, plug it here, select multiply, and here we use a value for all three numbers, and let's make it, let's say, 5. The more I turn this value up, the more I'm gonna see how the parts that are higher become clearer. So let's turn to 100. As you can see now, I have a distinction, and this distinction is going to be much sharper if I just move these sliders together. So as you can see now, the highest part of the terrain are actually rocks, while the lowest one are actually sand. Let's make 150. Okay, great. Now I can go back to layout. So now let's create the water. Actually, first we can scatter the moss as a seaweed on the terrain as well. So let's just turn the stalagmite on and add an extra geometry node, and we select scatter moss. Okay, much better. For the water, I can just duplicate the terrain, move it up. I remove the scatter and the stalagmites. I change the texture to water, which it was a previously created texture. Let's switch to black and white. We can happily reduce the value to a much more reasonable number. That's great. Here we still have the delete geometry applied, so to move it down we can just copy this node group and change the value. So some minor detail. And finally we can just add the last piece of the puzzle, that is to say the black pearl. which is actually a model that I borrowed from Sketchfab and slightly modified in order to fit in our diorama. Let's turn also the ceiling on, and we basically have everything we need to go to the final scene.